Today's video is brought to you by Skillshare.
Hey everyone, so in this video today I'm going to do some tests. I'm going to see how a cheaper Epson Flatbed scanner stacks up against the Nikon Coolscan 9000 when working with medium format film. And we're going to see if the Epson is all you actually might need if you're only shooting 120. So ever since I've been doing scanning videos featuring the Coolscan, I've had a lot of people reach out quite consistently just wondering if it's worth the difference in price from an Epson Flatbed. And obviously, depending on the model of Epson that you buy, that's really going to determine how big that gap is. For example, though, today we're going to be using the 4990, which is the version I own. I paid, I think, $200 for that scanner. So quite a big difference. You know, I paid $3,000 for the Coolscan. But like with all my other videos, my goal really is just to do these tests, show you the results, and let you kind of make the decision for yourself. I will give you kind of my thoughts and my opinion, but obviously everyone's needs are different and everyone's preferences are different as well. And then on top of that, just want to make a note that I am going to include a download link below with the full res file, so you can download them, check them out, just because there are compression issues with YouTube. So what we're gonna do in this test today is we're gonna scan some 645, some 6.7, and also one overexposed image, which should give us a nice range of options to look at and compare. When it comes to specs, with the 4990, it can scan up to a claimed 4800 DPI resolution and has a listed Dmax of 4.0. This is an older scanner, but still very capable, and I don't have any experience with the newer V800s or 850s, but from what I've read, the differences in detail and quality aren't going to be drastic. The Coolscan has a max resolution of 4000 DPI and a Dmax of 4.8, and as you'll see, that max resolution is accurate, unlike what you get with flatbeds. One more quick note as well, workflow, these were scanned in ViewScan as raw DNGs, then converted with Negative Lab Pro in Lightroom. But today what we're really gonna focus on is the difference in detail between these two scanners, not so much the color. We will talk about it a little bit, but obviously, as you all know, when converting color negative film, everyone's gonna get different results just depending on your workflow and your methods and stuff like that. So I didn't really spend too much time trying to match the two of these, but there were a few differences that did stand out with color that we will talk about. But anyways, let's jump into this and take a look at the results. Okay, so we're gonna start with 645. This is the Coolscan, but what I actually do wanna do, like I said, we're gonna mainly focus on detail for this video, but it is worth just talking quickly about the difference in color between these two. You know, depending on your workflow, everyone's gonna be getting different results, but I did just wanna kind of point out here, so before we look at the detail of these images, I'm gonna jump to a little bit of a comparison view here. Just throw this first image up on the left from the Nikon, and then I'll throw up the Epson on the right. So these two images are straight out of Negative Lab Pro, and these are very similar when it comes to the settings that were used. So I actually copy and pasted the Negative Lab Pro settings to the Epson files from the Nikon conversions, and they looked quite different. So then from there, I actually had to go and tweak the kind of color temp, tint, and stuff like that to try and get them to match a little bit. So it is interesting just to see that, you know, the files coming out of both of these scanners are quite different. The other thing that I noticed with the Nikon, and also noticed this in the Plustek review I did comparing the Plustek against the Coolscan, is just the Nikon files always come out a lot more saturated. It's almost like the colors are a lot more kind of rich and vibrant, whereas these Epson files, same with the Plustek ones, always just seem a lot more flat. Some people actually said that they seemed a lot more natural. You know, you could argue either way for sure. But even as you add, say, like saturation to these Epson ones, I've noticed that they don't take to color as well. That's not to say they're bad, but when comparing them with something like the Coolscan, I found the Nikon always just stays like a little more rich, a little more vibrant. Even if we just went here quick, again, this is the Epson on the right, and added some saturation to it. Actually, let's do, for fun, not that you would ever do this, or maybe you would, but we'll jack saturation to 100. We'll just go back to this Nikon one for a second and do the same. And then we'll do a little side by side. So you can see the difference between the two if you, say, get all crazy with the saturation. The Nikon handles it really well, but it is actually interesting to see how much more saturated it is when they both have the exact amount applied. So I don't really have a point that I'm trying to make here with the two. I just wanted to show you that because as we go through these image examples, you will notice a difference in the look between these files. So the settings were tweaked in Negative Lab Pro because when I pasted them over and they were the same, they were quite different. So getting two different looks out of both of these scanners. And the trend that I've seen, at least with the Nikon files, is they seem to be a lot more kind of saturated and rich and vibrant than any other scanners that I've used. So just want to point that out. But going back to detail. So this is the first file. This is a 645. So this is 8,400 pixels on the long edge. So a huge file size, especially for 645. And you'll see that it just looks amazing when it comes to, you know, sharpness and detail on the front grille of this car. And this, so this has no sharpening applied. None of these do. A few of them might just from me messing around with them and then forgetting to reset it. So I will reset it if we get to those ones. But these files basically are what I would consider like my base files to start working with. So these, like I said, went through Negative Lab Pro. They did have the kind of capture, what I would consider the capture sharpening preset done in Negative Lab Pro, but it was the same for all of the image files. But when it comes to these converted TIFFs, no sharpening, and these are kind of like the starting point that I would work off of for, you know, color, contrast, stuff like that afterwards. But even with no sharpening applied to this TIFF file, it looks great. And then the cool thing with these Nikon files is they do take sharpening really well. Obviously this is being just like rough and heavy handed in Lightroom, but as you add sharpness to this file, it takes it really well and looks even better. So just super nice, as expected. But if we jump over to this Epson one, the one thing I will point out, the Nikon files were all scanned at 4000 DPI, which is that scanner's max resolution. And as you saw, at its max resolution, it looks amazing. So that number that's listed is kind of like a true resolution. Whereas, you know, the Epson Flatbed scanners always list, in my opinion, these really high max resolution numbers. So even the 4990 is listed at, I think, 4800, so, you know, more than the Coolscan, but I found that you can never get, you know, the nicest results scanning at those max resolutions. Usually what I do is I either scan at half resolution, so 2400, or I downres that max resolution file in Photoshop afterwards. So I actually did, for a number of these images, I scanned at both. So I did max resolution and 2400 just so I can show you the difference between the two. So this is the Epson and this is at full resolution. So this is like a 10,000 pixel on the long edge image, so massive. But as you'll see, if we go into 100%, it looks nowhere near as nice as the Nikon file. It's quite soft, a little blurry, no sharpening applied to this one. But I have found, again, just, you know, being rough here in Lightroom, these full res ones never take sharpening as well. They kind of get to a point where like you aren't sharpening detail anymore. You're just kind of adding noise to the image. And if we do, we'll just do a little comparison here. So you have the Nikon on the left with no sharpening at all. And then we have the Epson on the right with a lot of sharpening. And you can see the Nikon still looks quite a bit better. But with that being said, if we go now to this next one, so this is the half res version. This is the Epson at 2400. This does have a bunch of sharpening applied, probably from when I was doing my tests with these. So that's without, no sharpening. But as we do add it to this half res version, you can see that these image files actually do start to sharpen up quite nice. And there's actually a decent amount of detail there. And of course, you know, if you could take this into Photoshop, or you could just be a little bit more kind of precise with how you sharpen and whatnot in Lightroom and get a little bit better results. But the point I'm trying to make here is just that these half res versions from the Epson do actually sharpen up quite well. So that's the thing. You'll notice this trend as we go through these images. These Epson ones, if we just go out to this view, these Epson ones at half resolution actually look quite nice with 645 film as well. So, you know, we're talking now, we're at a 5,000 pixel on the long edge image, which is still a pretty good file size, especially for 645 film on a cheap flatbed scanner. So nothing wrong with these results at all. But before we look at the rest of the examples, I just want to take a second to talk about today's sponsor, Skillshare, which is an online learning community for creative and curious people, and one that I've been part of as both a student and also a teacher for a couple of years now. Skillshare is a platform that I've used over the years to learn about photography, and they have a really great variety of courses to choose from. But I also love jumping on there to learn and improve in other areas as well. And one of the recent courses that I took was by Marcus Brownlee about making content for YouTube. I always love being able to see behind the scenes and learn about other creators' processes, and this course I found was full of incredibly valuable tips and lessons that I can apply to my workflow. When it comes to film photography, I also have a course on Skillshare that's been up for a couple years now, and it's for people who are new to the world of film, all about shooting your first roll of 35mm. The first 1,000 people to click the link below will get a free trial of Skillshare's premium membership, and then after that, it's only around $10 a month. Let's jump back into it. Okay, so another example here. This is one that I thought would be good just because we have, you know, this really fine detail, these words and these letters here on the front of this old phone. So we will go to full res version again from the Epson. Again, similar to that last one that we saw, you know, quite soft. Can only do so much with it. But the thing is, you know, I said at the start of this video, it's all going to be personal preference. You might look at this full res Epson one with some sharpening applied and be like, it looks great. It's good enough for what I want to do. So all comes down to, you know, what you prefer. But we'll go to the 2400 again. This has sharpening applied from my test that I did. Let's just go to a reference view. So Nikon on the left, Epson on the right. We'll go ahead, we'll add some sharpening to the Epson. So it does clean up pretty nice when you do that. Obviously the Nikon doesn't have any sharpening applied after, so if we wanted to make this kind of a fair comparison, if we are kind of going this route, add some sharpening to it. And it does look great. But I will say, you know, these Epson files at half resolution sharpened up are not far off the Nikon at full resolution. But obviously with the Nikon, you know, you're getting quite a bit bigger image size, so 8,300 pixels versus 5,000 on the long edge. But not bad there on the Epson. Okay, so now we're going to jump to some 6.7. So this is on the Nikon. And as you'll see, again, no surprise, looks amazing. This is at 100%. You know, 10,500 pixel wide image, just massive file. And, you know, a ton of detail in these words here. And they only get better as you add sharpening. Same with over here, basically throughout the image. Just looks great. And that's what I've always loved about the Coolscan is just, you know, regardless what like film size you throw at it, 35, 645, 6.7, you always know that you're just going to kind of get the most out of the film, which is, for me, is worth the money you pay for this thing. So it looks great, but if we jump to Epson, this has sharpening applied. Let's pull that off again. I should have reset these before I started, but this is the Epson at 100% at full resolution, almost 13,000 pixels at 4,800 DPI. It's a massive image. And you can see with 6.7, you know, obviously the bigger the negative gets, the better the result's going to be on the flatbed. I purchased the flatbed to scan my 4x5 negatives. Obviously, that's a massive piece of film, and I've been definitely happy with the results you can pull from that. But as you can see with 6.7, it does get quite a bit better. Compare the two again here. Actually, you know what? Let's just go ahead and pull the sharpening off of this Nikon file and go back to the Epson on the right. Full res one, here we go. So yeah, I mean, again, I'm sure you're starting to notice this trend with how these look. You know, the Nikon's quite a bit better, but with the 6.7, and the larger, you know, negative size, especially as you add sharpening, it's that gap is definitely starting to narrow a little bit. And you might look at these right now and be like, you know, this is perfectly acceptable for me, and there's no way I would ever spend the extra money for the Nikon. It's all really gonna be up to you. But again, we'll jump to, this is the half-res version with sharpening applied. That's without. But as we add it, you can see it looks pretty good. So that's the cool thing, you know, if you're shooting 6.7, you wanna use a flatbed like the 4990. At 2400 DPI, you're getting like a 6400 pixel wide image. It's a pretty big file size. You could do a lot with that, print at a decent size, and there's plenty of detail. So not bad at all. Okay, so one more 6.7 image, then we're gonna look at the overexposed negative. What we'll do is let's look at this kind of front grille, and this fan looks great. We'll pull up a side-by-side. Come on, there we go. So more of the same, but it's getting a little repetitive. I'm sure you're kind of getting the point now, but just wanted to kind of show you these different examples so you can figure out if the Epson is basically good enough for you. Look at the 2400 version. That obviously you can tell has a bunch of sharpening applied to it. So that's without, and that's with. So again, you know, this Nikon, the cool thing and what I love about the Nikon is just knowing that, okay, you shoot 6.7 or 6.45, you know, especially with something like 6.7, you're gonna be able to get this 10,500 pixel wide image that is incredibly detailed. And with a file like this, you can go and you can print quite large, got a lot of flexibility with it. And that for me is kind of what makes it worth it, but that Epson, you know, you can still get decent results out of it. Or I should say very good results, better than decent. But the one thing I do want to look at between these two images quickly is just when we get into these areas of like extreme highlights where you have these like really kind of bright transitions, full sun here on this front bumper. And when I did that Plustek comparison, that's where I did notice a difference for sure. And you can see it in the Epson as well, is they just go like a little bit muddy, a little bit gray on the Epson version. The Nikon has this really nice kind of transition, and these bright areas still stay very kind of punchy and nice. They don't go muddy and gray like on the Epson. And again, kind of splitting hairs a little bit here. You might look at this and be like, that would never bother me, but worth pointing out for sure. And you can see it up here as well. If we look at kind of this area on the car. Okay, so last one to wrap this up. I want to look at overexposure. This was some lomography color negative 400. This is from a film test I did on the channel. This image in particular, I think is like 4 stops overexposed, so quite a dense negative. And in my experience in the past, you know, using something like a V550, I found that even film that was like a stop or two overexposed, the scanner would start to struggle a little bit with the denser negative, and you'd get these like weird color shifts and stuff like that. So I wanted to do that in this comparison. I did it with the Plustek. The Plustek was quite a bit worse. You know, the Nikon, again, just like with different film sizes and having no compromises, I found it handles overexposed film very well, and there isn't much of a difference at all. So this is from the Coolscan. You know, the colors still look great. No weird shifts or anything like that. But I was surprised. This is the 4990 version, and I expected a lot worse. You know, that when I did the Plustek, there was like a huge loss of saturation, some weird color shifts, hard to really start to correct it back. But if we do these side by side, obviously the colors are going to be a little bit different, just what we talked about at the start. But you can see the Epson held up great. You know, if I was like, you know, picking at things, it seems like it's going a little more kind of gray in these areas where there are, you know, some like sunlight, brighter highlights and stuff like that. But obviously without digging into these files and trying to correct them perfectly, the Epson did a really good job. I am noticing like there is this like orange kind of brown cast that's bleeding a little bit here on the edges, but it is there in the Nikon as well, not as bad. So cool to see. The 4990 surprised me with this overexposed film, because like I said, with my V550 in the past, I did start to notice some weird shifts and stuff like that. So really cool to see that it could still kind of hold up to quite dense film. Okay, so interesting results, you know, really not that surprising to me, just because before I bought the Nikon, I worked with a flatbed for all my medium format work. But as you saw, you know, the difference isn't that drastic. Obviously the Nikon files were still kind of superior. They looked amazing. What I love about that scanner is regardless of what you throw at it when it comes to frame size or density, you know you're gonna be able to get the best results possible and kind of the most out of your film. But depending on what you're doing with your work, these Epson files are still pretty impressive with medium format film. Like you saw, the 645 stuff, especially at half resolution at 2400 DPI, sharpened up and looked really nice. The 6.7 at half resolution looked great. Even at full resolution, I'm sure you could go sharpen it in Photoshop and be able to, you know, make it look pretty close to the Nikon files. So really just gonna come down to what you're doing with your images and what you need out of your image files. So yeah, anyways, hope this video helped. Hope these results answer some questions and give you something to think about if you're looking to maybe buy a Nikon or decide if you should invest or stick with your Epson. So anyways, as always, just wanna say thank you. Appreciate all the support, all the comments, everything like that, and I'll talk to you soon.